Okay, hello everybody, and welcome to the first episode of Zeitguys, a podcast focused on the creation and analysis of culture. We hope to discuss a variety of fields such as literature, film, music, and so on, and especially look forward to speaking with and promoting new and independent creators in their respective fields. I'm Alagiri, and this is my co-host Gallo. Hello.
Everyone.
And our very first guest, Isaac Young, independent author and cultural commentator. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that'd be fair to say. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yes. So we're here to discuss Isaac's his re-release and rebranding of a novel he worked on. Used to be called Giga Heroes, now it's Dead Men Running. If you'd like to give a summary, you can.
So
But
I guess the best way to describe Dead Men Running is it follows three POV characters as they cross paths in this post-apocalyptic dystopian version of America in the future, and there's superheroes, and it tackles much of the same concepts as The Boys, but instead of a lot of nihilistic, subversive, and vulgar culture like The Boys, it tries to find glimmers of hope in the cynicism, and I'd say that's where my work really stands out.
yeah, I would definitely agree because there's I think the whole boys thing, the very cynical superhero take, it kind of started back with the was it Watchmen, right? That's the one.
Watchmen is the ground zero of it
Yeah, the
back,
ground zero of it,
in
but it's gotten really popular recently from like all the evil Superman clones. That's
oh, yeah.
yeah. Which is actually something that was interesting. I kind of picked up on yours is Captain Eagle is obviously supposed to be like that Superman like figure, yeah.
Uh, yeah, that's actually it's a very eagle eye you have there.
Yeah.
No pun intended.
But
That's a small detail that I didn't expect anyone to really pick up on.
I
yeah.
mean, it's
It
fairly obvious. Well, it's not fairly obvious. We barely hear anything about Captain Eagle
Yeah,
himself, but
but that was the thing I wanted to comment on. From what little we do here, it doesn't seem like he's, this evil Superman. If anything, it seems like he kind of opposed to the cyberpunk dystopia way things were going, and that's why they had to tried to get rid of him with the whole nuclear war.
Yes, I like to bury those sorts of details
Yeah,
that I like to do an offhanded reference to something in a chapter.
yeah,
Something that appears like regular world building fleshing out
yeah,
that slowly as the story unwinds becomes a plot thread of its own, but that for that particular detail, that's plans I have later down the line rather
yeah,
than in this particular novel.
yeah.
I
Well,
particularly appreciate things like that because you do that quite a bit there with references to the Forever Wars and one character's previous stint fighting in a war in Egypt that never really gets explored, but it does give a good way to show his previous resentment of the democratic regime and its pointless wars over basically nothing as far as we can tell from the plot so far.
Yeah, I would say that was definitely one of the themes of the book is exploring uh, so for the Democratic Union, which is the Society of Dead Men Running, I wanted to capture a sense that America never stopped doubling down on all of its excesses,
yeah,
including their consumption, including the fraying of the social fabric. And one of those is the never ending forever wars that seem to just impoverish the nation, but they also never really seem to end.
yeah. But actually, speaking of the social commentary and Dead Men Running, I think that was one of the things that really stood out. It's the first work in like recent memory I can think of where it very much felt like it was written recently and from someone who's aware of where things are. it has a very bleak but grounded feel to it. Like, there's that part where the guy's burning to death in the car and everyone's just recording it on their state mandated
That's a
phones.
that that was a standout scene. That
Yeah,
had brought to mind everything about modern problems with like nuisance streamers, people just turning their cameras on horrific events and doing nothing to help
yeah.
and sort of things like that. That's yeah.
And then also,
Uh,
yeah, go ahead.
Here's the thing. I wrote that scene. Months and months, like actually probably a full on year before you actually had the exact same incident, but it was in real life and in a subway.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Ah,
yeah.
yeah,
We all recall that one.
yeah. But another standout example is when after Mason sells his phone, he decides to for the cheeseburger. He decides to go to the suicide clinic, and it's just that very typical DMV like experience everyone in America has had when they've ever had to go to a local government office.
Yeah, I was for that particular sequence when Adam Mason's on the brink of killing himself.
Yeah,
I think Maid was going on at that time. It was just I think it was just really like picking up news headlines like
yeah,
what they're doing in Canada.
yeah,
Yeah.
And so I thought about okay, if we were to roll the clock forwards, let's say another 20 years, when the state is just failing to even kill its own citizens properly,
yeah,
with things that become so frayed and decrepit that even the evil it's trying to conduct, it's failing at.
yeah. That was
That
the
was
standout thing is it's so bureaucratic that he can't even go to the suicide clinic because he doesn't have his phone, which has all the like IDs and that.
It was
yeah.
also another good scene of another social commentary that isn't uh, beat upon too much in the book, but it really stands out if you read between the lines.
Yes,
The social
the
stratification at the bottom of
very
the
subtle
yeah.
commentary of high and low priorities on the UBI thing. Yeah.
You
So
somehow
that
made UBI more nightmarish.
Yes.
yeah, with that, I wanted to. You see, the problem with a lot of conservative art
Yeah.
is they make it so ham-fisted. I kind of wanted to touch on DEI in Dead Men Running,
Yeah.
but I didn't want to make it explicit in
Yeah.
any real sense, except for like a few offhanded references to it, because
Yeah.
it's overdone,
Of course.
and I don't want the sense that this is
It's about that, which
how you
it's
say it
not.
falls into the
Yeah.
stereotype of
Yeah.
conservative propaganda,
Yeah.
which everyone immediately turns off to.
Yeah. No, you're the
So I
way
was like, I took all those elements of the obvious conservative critiques and I kind of just threaded them a little bit in the background. So they're there, but they're by no means the focus of the story.
yeah, I do like how you incorporated that. It's there, which it feels like it's odd to have something written nowadays that doesn't address that, especially when it's doing modern social commentary. But it's not the focus. The focus is the very timeless message of what the mainly Adam and Daniel are focusing on. Vance is a little different, but we'll get to that in a in a bit. um, but yes,
Speaking
going
of
and yes, Gallo, you had something.
speaking of Vance, the three perspective characters, Daniel Peterson, Seattle Vance, Adam Mason, the three perspectives of three different parts of society. The superhero who is allegedly living high on life but is absolutely miserable. The closest thing to a middle class, which is basically a ruthless mercenary, also living miserable. And Adam Mason, the suicidal homeless bum, who is obviously miserable. I really did enjoy the perspective switch between the three characters going through as the story progressed. Because I was like, oh no, I'm now finished Daniel. I want to know what happened to Daniel, but I have to go through Seattle, and now
Yeah.
I'm reinvested in what Seattle is doing.
Another thing I liked
Uh,
from a mechanical perspective with that is it was always the same sequence. So you would leave off on a cliffhanger with one character and you would know, oh, I got to get through these next two chapters to find out what happened. But those would have their own cliffhangers, which was really good at keeping it a page turner. And
so yeah, so what I wanted to ask about that was like Was there any inspiration or influences that in your writing that made you take that decision for the perspective switching between the characters, or was it something you came up with yourself? And how did you how difficult did you find it in writing?
I can't remember because I actually have a few other books that I wrote before this one. The one where I utilized the three POV character perspective was a sci-fi book called The Matryoshka Divide.
Hmm.
And I don't think it particularly had any inspiration in terms of the mechanics of how the story worked, but I always liked taking three radically different perspectives and switching between them
Yeah.
as the story progressed. And I've always, unfortunately, I haven't quite done this, but I've always wanted to mess with the chapter order as part of telling the story. Um, because it goes Daniel Peterson, Seattle Vance, Adam Mason, and then it cycles through.
Yeah.
And at the very end, I guess I'm not going to spoil which character bites it, but one character does bite it, and then it switches to Daniel Peterson, Seattle, Daniel Peterson, Seattle. I've always wanted to do a more radical switch up in terms of chapter orders as part of narrative telling, but I haven't gotten to that yet.
Radical in what
Well,
way?
even yeah,
I don't know. I'm still spitballing on
Okay.
it. The obvious one is a character disappears and you don't get their POV's perspectives for a while, but that's
Right.
not unique enough.
Yeah.
Like other authors do that all the time. I'm still spitballing and trying to figure out because I'm really interested in meta narratives, whereas the structure of the story in the book informs the story.
Yeah.
And it's sort of an idea that I'm trying to tackle,
There's
but
actually an
I haven't really messed
interesting
with it a lot yet.
book me and Gallo read recently that might, be a bit of a good inspiration to you for that. It was a French crime novel called Irene. And
why?
what it
Oh no,
is
yeah, ring, yeah, yeah.
yeah. So most of the book you're just reading it through, it seems normal, right? And then near the end you find out it was all a manuscript of a character in the book, and it just reframes the whole thing. And you, when you're reading the next part, you're looking for the little inconsistencies, like what was in the manuscript that was made up and what was actually, true, because the character who wrote the manuscript didn't have access to all the information. But yeah,
It was a masterclass of sleight of hand.
yeah, well, that might be worth
Yeah.
taking a look at if you have the time or interest.
One example I did for my dark fantasy novel, The Domes of Calrathia, was the main character is exiled from his monastic order. And you don't actually find out the reason for the exile until many chapters in.
Hmm.
But you can find out about it immediately if you turn it over and go to the back and go to the back blurb. And that actually informs a detail in the story.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And so I kind of really like messing with those things, those
Yeah,
unconventional ways to give the reader clues, heads up, stuff like that.
yeah. But with regards to perspective, I know Gallo has read some of The Last Human, but do you always use first person perspective in your writings?
I do not.
Okay,
Actually, my first published book, The Matryoshka Divide, is completely in third person perspective.
right.
After I published that, I read Gene Wolfe's book, The New Sun, and I immediately afterwards switched to first person perspective
Okay.
because I
So,
felt it was a lot better to. It's a lot more fluid in terms of character thoughts,
mhm,
their perspectives on the world.
right. So
Um,
from aside from your first book, then you've been using first person consistently?
yes.
Okay.
Do you prefer it, or would you ever see yourself writing back in third person and present again?
Um, I actually think there's one thing coming up, particularly for my next book, The Last Human, where So the story so far, it's a first-person recounting of the childhood of a galactic warlord as he rises from slavery to a position of eminence in the galaxy. And we're slowly approaching an arc in the story where, because the entire thing is framed as his memoirs,
Yeah.
um, but I've slowly wanted to incorporate other perspectives as well.
Mm,
So I was thinking of when I do those different POVs, instead of also doing them from first person perspective, they would be from third person perspective.
yeah.
And it would sort of be the difference between the memoirs
And like a
as the,
chronicle.
visualization of the story, and then
Yeah.
also from the third person perspective, the reader knows, okay, we're going to step away from this
Mm,
character, but these aren't part of the
yeah.
memoirs.
I
And I
think
thought that would be a cool twist that I haven't really seen in literature at all.
I think an interesting way you could frame that is have the third person's perspective be like a historical document, like a chronicle or something, talking about his rise or whatever it is. In
That would actually be a callback to some old epistemological writing, like how Dracula was actually a collection of like newspaper clippings and all such as things there interwoven with the main narrative kind of deal. But obviously, that may be too limiting for what you're intending,
it
Isaac.
could
But
be
it's an idea.
yeah,
Yeah,
so,
I was hoping to blend the manuscript style with third
yeah.
person omniscient, but it's an idea. I haven't. It's still got another. I got a long ways to go
All
before I
right.
get to that point.
All
Well,
right.
you're definitely dedicated. You've already promised 1,000 chapters of The Last Human. You're clearly going the whole Conan the Barbarian serial publishing right, but in the digital age, and I'm all here for it.
Yeah, me as
Yeah.
well. Now, we are going to move on to like discussing the characters in the novel specifically, but before that, there were just two questions I wanted to get out of the way. Me and Gallo were a little, disagreeing on what Gen Pop was. So, is Gen Pop the population in the cities, or is which I took that to be the open air prisons, or Gen Pop somewhere else?
Is Gen Pop just referring to the actual prisons to keep the Super Gen?
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be mostly. I'd imagine that they would refer to the prisons of just regulars as something else.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because that would be the cultural, like that the camps that they keep supers in. They're basically out in the middle of the wilderness
Okay.
in cities that are just fully abandoned,
Right.
and that would seem to be like that's like more culturally relevant, and so they would probably just call jails as something else.
Right. Now, the other organization, the more mysterious one, the ASA or ASA, is it like if you were to say it out, would it be pronounced ASA or ASA?
It would be. I've always pronounced it as ASA,
Okay.
and that's probably going to be the instruction I'm going to give my voice actors when I finally commission an audiobook of Dead
Yeah.
Men Running. But in terms of pronunciation, like in terms of reading it, I
Yeah.
always I always want to open up to my readers. It's
Leave it to
however you want
interpretation.
to,
Okay.
yeah, to interpret it. I always like, because I get asked questions about the world building. Was this a metaphor? Was this literal? And unless it's like directly relevant to the story, I generally like to have my readers have as much freedom as they possibly
Yeah.
can. As soon as it's written, I like to think the work sort of takes a life of its own,
Yeah.
and I don't want to constrict it in any way.
That makes sense. Now,
I guess that ties into your hatred of world building that you're so
yeah,
vocal about on Twitter.
and we'll get to that. But yes, with the ASA, did correct me if I'm wrong, but we never actually find out what it stands for in the novel.
I believe it should be mentioned at least a few times. Abnormal security agency.
Okay.
Oh, that may have come up once, but I must have missed it.
Yeah, I must have as
Yeah.
well. All right. Well, that was just the clarification there because neither of us remembered what it stood for. Now, going back to the characters, we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but the whole theme of the characters, they're in this world where there's not really any proper support structure for, living a good moral life and any of that. But aside from Vance, pretty much everyone who is like important in the story is trying to, even though they're not perfect at the start. Like Daniel, he kind of comes off as a little scummy to begin with, but it's clear he has a good heart overall. And Mason is he's a bit more, you know, down in the dumps and doesn't really have
Cynical,
his
but then again,
compass
yeah,
straight, but as he gets the power and has those reflections on life and the fact that he's, got a timer, he begins to care more about that and focuses on it. And even the urban defenders, in a lesser story, they would have all just been, uh jerks, narcissists, and psychos like in The Boys. And Daniel would have been the only one like with any redeeming features. But here they're all pretty much sympathetic. Like even the Blue Justice, who, because we're getting it from Daniel's perspective, we get a very negatively colored perspective of him. He, by the end of it, comes across as a genuinely heroic figure who is trying to do the right thing and be a hero despite the whole corpo restrictions on his job.
yeah, he's not just another evil Superman, even though he's teed up to be one from early on, just like Homelander. But that scene in between him and John in the alleyway after John had phased him halfway through a concrete floor to keep him trapped, and he actually went out of his way to destroy the communication device so that it couldn't be listened to, so he could actually have a genuine conversation with Nighthawk. That really sealed him as a good character in Africa. That it really helped us see him who as the man he was.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've always wanted to focus on more heroic moments through fallen people. Um, because what shows like what modern entertainment does is it shows extremely cynical people, and their better moments are so few and far between, that they might not as be there at all. And it's a
Uh,
proper way to put this. Oh, sorry. Is the audio
no,
doing good?
Your audio
yeah,
is
go
fine,
ahead,
yeah.
go ahead.
Okay. It's the general direction of modern entertainment is to tear down, and I think that's what's their fatal flaw,
Yeah.
is that they're always trying to basically deconstruct down to the bottom to the cesspool.
Yeah.
Um, and there's room for that literature and that kind of bleakness, I think, in some cases. The problem is literature and art. It sort of takes the direction of the people,
Yeah. Yeah.
and you're kind of lowering your audience into that cesspool when you do that. When I think you should 9 times out of 10 be uplifting them out of that.
Yeah, 100%
And the only
agree.
reason you
No, go
the
ahead.
only reason you depict that cesspool is to create a connection with the audience,
Yeah.
because they recognize, the circumstances, they might not be too different from my own in some way, at least in a spiritual way.
Yeah. And
Speaking of
another
that,
yeah, go
go
ahead,
on.
Gallo. No.
I was gonna speaking of that heroism and uplifting thing, it really came to a height during the finale, which I won't
Oh, yeah.
spoil when Nighthawk went out of his way, pushed himself to the absolute limit to rescue all those children, to the point where he actually genuinely felt for the first time he was a hero.
Yeah. That was a wonderful scene as well. But, thing
Sorry, go ahead.
yeah. No, I think I may have lost it, but, oh well. Oh, wait,
Well,
no,
speaking
no, I
of
do
another,
recall. Yes. Okay, so it was, what you were talking about, Isaac, with the way media now pretty much always people are going to be influenced by it. Like there's a lot of people who like to say art shouldn't be political, it should be purely entertainment and mock people who like get their morality from stories. But traditionally, that's always been the case, and that was a recognized fact is that people do learn how to perceive the world through the stories they consume. So we really, as a society, should be doing stuff that's more uplifting like this and showing people, okay, yes, things are bad, but it's still possible to be genuinely good and try and create something instructive despite all that. The whole like
I actually,
good person in a fallen world thing you were talking about.
yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
Go on. Sorry, Isaac. Go ahead.
I find a lot. I think a big problem in terms of modern entertainment. Um, I think is they don't modern artists don't know where goodness flows from. I
Yes.
mean, it was a progression of the decline as they slowly lost touch with their spirituality. But initially, you had goodness flows from God to a more Star Trek classical liberal. Oh, people are misguided, but if we create the right incentives, they'll be good. And we've degenerated to the point where goodness seems to be a complete mystery to modern artists that they can't even really visualize why it happens. Um, and you have a lot of artists nowadays. Some of the old guard say, "Oh, I believe in humanity."
Yeah.
Um,
I
I
believe in
don't
this big
necessarily
concept.
I don't share that perspective. I don't believe in humanity. I believe in God, and He works through fallen people.
Yeah.
And so, I guess if I were to accurately depict the world, um, which I don't think you really can in fiction because it's always just shadows on the wall,
Yeah.
and to a lesser extent, nonfiction as well.
Yeah. And
Um,
there's also the fact that the real world is just too multifaceted to fit into one work.
yeah, and so art really is a selection of details, right? It's basically what you're doing is you're choosing the most important parts of whatever you're trying to assemble together into one picture. And for a lot of modern artists, the most important parts are how vulgar can they make it, how
Yeah.
terrible they can make it, how cynical they can make it. And I wanted to include in those important parts basically the goodness of the characters shining through. I think that was important, even though it's not necessarily, if I take a bunch of randos in City 57 and I depict their lives, they're probably not going to be as good as
Yeah.
the average. Like these are clearly an above average sample.
Yeah, of course. And
Uh,
so I
uh,
think
with,
you
with
really
Go ahead.
succeeded with your goal on that front. Congrats on that.
Especially with Adam Mason, like
Yeah.
there is that joke of like if you suddenly got superpowers, what would you do? And a lot of people honestly would be villains about it. They would just take advantage of all that. Meanwhile, you give this man at literally the last uh, inch of his rope in this hellish nightmare of cyberpunk dystopia. He was literally suicidal. You give him essentially Superman powers, and he doesn't immediately take advantage of that in the worst possible way. He actually sits back and reflects, showing that unexpectedly goodness can be found in almost essentially human trash.
Yeah, I wanted to because the obvious trope is that absolute power corrupts absolutely. I don't subscribe to that notion. I just think power reveals who a person is deep down.
Yeah.
And obviously there are corrupted elements of Adam Mason. But I
Yeah.
think I think it's also true that it's sometimes the circumstances of our lives. Sometimes they reveal parts of our character, and other times they obscure it.
Yeah. Like before
Um,
Adam got the powers, there was no real way for him to like display the character traits he did after he got the powers, like his willingness to risk himself for saving the kids from the facility, or the reflectiveness, or just the kind of compassion that he has when he confronts the other superhero team and he doesn't want to hurt them, even though he very much can. And, I won't spoil the outcome of that conflict. But yes, those are good examples of, I think, what you're talking about in the story.
Yeah. And another example of that actually is Nighthawk himself, who early on in the book, quite reasonably, if well, okay, reasonably for some people, abuses his powers to, teleport and jump off buildings just for the fun of it, so he can teleport somewhere else so safely and then, rightly get punished for it by an hour in the tank, as horrible as that is. But he also abuses so he can help his teammate, Sarah, Atomic Girl, meet her mother every now and again regularly in the Defender's Tower, which is really sweet of him, and he absolutely has no obligation to do that.
Yeah, and then another point on that is Daniel only gets the opportunity to be a real hero after he, goes his own way. And there's that moment during the climax where he goes and saves those kids, which he wouldn't have been able to do if he was still a corporate hero, ironically. So,
Yeah, I wanted to and I don't know what trend Zoomer art is going to take,
yeah,
but I suspect that a lot of Zoomer art is going to be about existing within broken systems and breaking free of those systems. At least the desire to break free of those systems, because there comes a point. I think a lot of literature and art and movies and television pre at least 2020 was about maintaining the status quo. That's basically the story of every superhero story ever, really, is just
yeah,
maintaining the status quo of this vague democracy that somehow has superpower people protecting it and yet not in charge at the same time, which is
And
obviously, I think, a glaring contradiction.
yeah,
and somehow not
But
also dealing with the more corrupt elements of their own government, which honestly someone like Superman would never tolerate.
yeah, he always has to be just virtuous enough to maintain the status quo, but not virtuous enough to actually deal with the evil elements in society. It's
yeah.
always hand waved aside by saying humanity's free will is sacred or whatever. Um,
I do think you're
which,
right about the way Zoom Art's going to trend, though. It will definitely, no matter what, be anti status quo and about s- finding some way around the situation people are in, because it is a very rare thing for people of our generation to have their things in order. Like recently, I was talking with a friend I hadn't spoken to in years, and all the people he knows as well, even the ones who have jobs and are relatively well off for Zoomers, don't really have everything together, it seems. Which, I mean, to some extent, you're
yeah,
never gonna, but yeah, it's people
I
very much
mean,
feel an anxiety.
it's job, house, or girlfriend. You can get two out of the three.
Yeah, but never all
Actually, more
three.
like one out of the three nowadays.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
And you're lucky to get
but you're
one.
you're not like it's a rare person who has everything sorted out now,
yeah,
which is a shame.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, moving on to Vance, though. We talked about how Daniel and Mason are characters that start off a bit more gray and become more heroic, but Vance is an interesting contrast there. He's not a villain per se. Yeah, there's nuance to him, but he's definitely an antagonistic force to both Mason and Daniel, and he's someone who kind of has resigned himself to, just looking out for his own interests and isn't really pursuing a greater good, which I think is
Yeah.
an
He's
interesting
close.
contrast there.
I think he's the closest character in the book we could actually see as an actual anti-hero by what used to be meant by the term, even though that's a very abused term these days, because he is like out for number one, but he's not so ruthless about it that he will just haphazardly, willingly abandon his merc friends at the end, even though he will risk them. Like that shootout scene in the server room with the young kid as a standard example, but he clearly has his depths, and he clearly has a personal motivation for what he does, and it's hard to argue with that.
Yeah, he's sort of a more classical, cynical character
Yeah.
in a sense, where he resembles a lot of archetypes you find in the good deconstructive literature,
Yeah.
at least for however long that exists.
Yeah. I
Because at some point the ending always disappoints because those glimmers of goodness just disappear.
yeah.
Um, but Seattle Vance is me sort of trying to reflect light through a darker tinged character,
Yeah.
and I don't precisely know how he's ultimately going to end up. I'm still debating that.
Right.
Usually I have characters pat down, but he's an interesting case, and I need to tinker with him a
Yeah.
lot.
There's definitely a
See
lot
if
of directions you can take his character. So to see what you've got in store. But is there anything else
Now,
you wanted
for
to talk about with Vance in particular?
um he's probably the closest character out of all of them you're gonna find to an equivalent from the boys.
Yeah.
I never
yeah,
I it's
yeah, go on. Sorry.
I was open and honest that the book is partly inspired by the boys as sort of a more uh sorry it's more uplifting. um Sorry, I lost my train of thought. I just saw in the chat, Isaac, can you explain how Vance differs from Amon Russ character wise? Vance is a lot more cynical. Amon Russ actually believes in things. Seattle Vance, he intuits a lot through emotion, and he's not as intellectual about his ideas. Amon Russ has thought really deeply about his perspective. Seattle Vance really hasn't, and he's driven way more by just emotion.
Yeah.
Well, to be fair, Eamon Russ had literally centuries to think about his actions.
Yeah.
Although,
But getting back to Seattle Vance and the boys, yeah, he's the most similar parallel, which I'm glad to say because I think that character from the boys is honestly the best one out of all of them. Um, but the interesting thing is, so I kind of really want to market it because a lot of people describe Dead Men Running as the boys, but based. But at the same time, it's it kind of makes the
It's a
story
bit
a
too
bit of a meme.
reductive. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's a bit too limiting for what you're
and
actually.
it makes
Honestly, when I first heard that pitch, it kind of turned me off, but I'm glad I
yeah,
read it.
exactly.
Yeah.
That's like everyone who got hooked on this story through that pitch were like, I came into this expecting it was going to be edgy Homelander with 4chan memes, and then they're like, surprise, no, this is an actual book and
Yeah.
not some post on 4chan.
I suppose that's a good segue to talk about what's your ultimate vision for the Vagabond series going forward. Now that we have the Kickstarter to launch the physical copy of the first book, like where do you want to go so if anyone has to do an elevator pitch for Deadman Running again, it won't be just the boys but base. Like what would you hope it leads to?
Ultimately, the vision I have in mind is parallel structures and societies and peoples coming together to establish a more just world
Mm,
than the prevailing dystopian systems. And not necessarily in like the typical revolution sense as you see in a lot of YA literature,
yeah.
but
I was
more in the sense of just as things naturally collapse, you have people in power who are just by necessity have to be more competent, have to be creating bonds of loyalty, cultivating virtue, because as things decay and fall apart, you're just going to get dragged down unless you have enough virtue that people will have your back.
Yeah. That's definitely a
And so we're just
refreshing theme to tackle in modern work entertainment.
Because you really don't see that anywhere really in
No,
Western media
no.
at all.
no,
Mainstream
it's
media
always
is still stuck on the whole status quo thing for the most part.
Especially in young adult media, as you said, Isaac, because the closest we get to that is the found family trope that is abused so egregiously in literally everything. It doesn't mean anything anymore.
yeah. It's always what like it's always the rebels versus the empire.
Yeah.
And then the rebels overthrow the empire, but the rebels can never be the establishment. Not
Yeah.
ever. They can
King
The
never
Arthur,
actually assume real authority. They always have to be opposed to some imperialist structure, even though in real life, our establishment is basically just our like our establishment wants to be the rebels and the establishment at the same time,
yeah.
and you get that from a lot of left leaning people.
I think like the perfect pop culture encapsulation of this was the Star Wars sequels where
Oh yeah,
the New Republic was in charge, but somehow the good guys were the resistance.
yeah, against the First Order, which was definitely not the Empire because it wasn't the Empire, but looked like the Empire and
Yeah.
had the resources of the Empire. Because in a way of putting this, like the whole Arnos has to be the rebels and never allowed to take power when the good guy wins is like King Arthur is never allowed to take his throne.
Yeah, it's always just, the boy king. It's never Arthur, the established king. But yeah, that sort of creative bankruptcy is part of why we started this whole thing and why it's very refreshing to have read your work. So glad
Especially when
yes.
you're talking about your difficulties and dreams of promotion of fellow artists and networking them together. That's exactly what we're trying to do as well.
Yeah.
yeah. It's always difficult out there. It's hard for the indie, especially in indie literature, which is
Nightmare.
like so
Oh,
few people read nowadays.
believe me, I
I
know.
kind of wish I kind of wish the I was there on the scene like 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah.
But I can't really
Yeah.
change that.
Yeah, literature in particular, people read a lot less nowadays, or when they do read, it's usually not fiction. Uh, I mean, there's the whole elephant in the room of women's fiction, but that's its own can of worms. But
So yeah,
yeah,
we're not dealing with that in
yes,
this
the
podcast
general
episode.
reader who reading non pornographic fiction is a rare thing nowadays. So it's an already sparse market, and you're competing against industry giants for a very small share of the market.
And the ever-present
Yeah, and
perspective.
and also, I mean, those who read, they don't want to read new stuff. They want to
Yeah.
read classic literature because they know they're going to get their
Yeah.
money's worth.
Yeah, that's another
I
thing is
know
the risk
it
averse
is a very
behavior.
seldom person who. Oh, sorry.
I was just saying that's the sort of risk averse behavior, which it's fair, but you can't get anything new that way.
That's true. I mean,
Yeah.
it's the entrepreneurial reader is a very rare demographic.
Yeah.
Um, People generally want to already invest in things that have a reputation. And that's the one thing that unfortunately indies have a really hard time cultivating.
Yeah. And that's
Yeah.
especially true of literature where a movie, yeah, that'll be 2 hours. If it sucked, it sucked, but, you're not investing that much time into it. A book, that's something that's gonna take a while to get through in most cases, so definitely makes sense
It
why
As you
also
people
it
are
say,
more.
also is
Yeah.
engages way more of your brain.
Yes, that's definitely
Like
and
you
true
just
as
have
too.
to pay more visceral attention to it
Yeah.
than a movie.
Yeah.
because you're engaging your imagination as you read and all that. And we touched on this earlier about how the art actually affects views and perspectives affected by the art, the stories to consume, you are what you eat. So if
Yeah.
all you're eating is essentially trash, then you're gonna think in nothing but trash terms.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. And it's a hard fight.
Yeah.
Oh
Fortunately,
yeah,
there's not much more to say about that.
Yeah, it's
no,
true.
there
I
really
mean,
isn't.
all we can really do with that is just like work on it. Not too much to discuss. But going back to the actual Dead Men Running itself, another interesting theme throughout, and we touched on it a little bit earlier, was the banality of evil. But another scene that exemplified that really well is when Vance is going through the ASA regional HQ and he's just reflecting on the fact that he wasn't sure what he wanted to see there, like maybe some like dark dungeon with chains and so on, but no, it's just a regular office building, which I feel really captures the sort of malicious spirit in our institutions nowadays in society. That was
Not
another.
even a high class office building. It was like out of date technology. Everything was like run down, yellowed paper. No one was dressed well. It looked like a bad office, even
Yeah.
though it was like this central regional office of this huge international organization.
Yeah, I really wanted to capture because the banality of evil has been touched on by countless books, films, TVs. It's not a new trope by
No,
any
yeah.
means. What I sort of wanted to add to the conversation was just the decay. It's
Yeah.
it's not these like these systems are oppressive, yes, but they've never been weaker than they have before.
Mhm.
Nobody believes in them. They've lost all their power. They're not functioning well at all. They look like if only someone could blow the house of cards all down, then everything would just be done in an instant, and the new world could begin.
Yeah.
And yet,
Yeah.
despite they're still somehow lingering on.
Yes, that is
And
something
I
that
think that's
definitely came through a lot in the book. There were multiple points where you talked about that.
I think that's a particularly Zoomer insight, is because
Yes.
a lot. I remember all the entertainment of like the 2010s, for example. It was it was just that insurmountability. It was just the very oppressive empire, this invincible empire. But nowadays, especially after COVID, it just seems that these oppressive systems have never been weaker than they have before, and people are just waiting for it to come undone.
Yeah.
So that's a definitely real feel going around, not just in America, but I could see the same here in Europe as well. That's definitely part of the zeitgeist going around.
Yeah. And another salient point that stood out was when Vance was reminiscing about his parents, and they kind of had that boomer energy to them. I have the quotes here. Quote, they had living memories of a world where one could afford to have a childhood. And then the other quote, we didn't get to be the people they got to be. And I feel like that very much captures the situation of Zoomers nowadays. We don't live in the same prosperous economy that they came up in, and the old advice doesn't really apply.
Uh, uh, Valerie?
I'm sorry, did I cut out?
Yeah, just repeat what you said. Yeah.
Okay. So where did I cut out at?
They didn't get a chance to live their lives they lived.
Ah, yes. Sorry. We didn't get to be the people they got to be is the other quote, and I feel like that's just very much encapsulates the Zoomer experience of we aren't living in the same society our parents did. Where it's not as prosperous, and so the old advice doesn't necessarily work.
But just
Yeah.
transposed into cyberpunk dystopia.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess when I was thinking when I wrote that is I was thinking of systems decay that you have to assume a level of just you have to be able to exist in more violent times in whatever way you can. And
Yeah.
obviously that's growing more true by the day. I mean, we're just waiting for the next attack. Actually, the next attack happened in Australia. Um,
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was
where is a terrible, horrible event
Yeah.
where some terrorists. Actually, I don't want to get too political with this,
Yeah.
but point is that it's getting more and more dangerous out there, and you
Yeah.
have to respond to it either by becoming armed with weapons yourself, or being able to be more inconspicuous to blend in, or being able to flee from danger easily, or to basically lock yourself up in these enclaves
Yeah.
of gated communities.
Yeah.
basically
So
everyone's in
the
survival
people
mode.
themselves have to change to respond to the times.
Basically, that whole decline in the novel very much parallels the way things are heading today.
It's definitely a book of the current times. It
Yes.
definitely feels that
Yes.
way.
It feels like it was written after 2020.
Oh yeah, when the world stopped turning, again after 2008. That's when the
Uh,
world ended for me.
uh, now there was one other. Yeah, so world
You want to bring up
building.
the?
Okay, what were you
Oh
going to
yeah,
talk about, Gala? What were you going to say?
some of the minor characters who are no less impactful, like
Okay, yeah.
Walter Alvarez,
Let's talk
the,
about that
the, the, the
first.
yeah, the irredeemable corporate man who is, I think, is the only one who has no good side to him at all.
Yeah.
I was in the original manuscript. I was tinkering for a good side to Walter,
Yeah.
but I thought it would be a good contrast to have at least one character who is utterly irredeemable
Yeah, I think
to
that
acknowledge
was
that reality.
yeah, the right decision because not every character needs to be sympathetic. As a matter of fact, the bad guys should be allowed to be bad guys. Is generally what I think. Yeah, you can have sympathetic ones, but we've, as a society, gotten way too obsessed with that trend in media.
Yeah, we need villains who are villains who need to be struck down.
Yeah.
We need Saurons to be Saurons.
Yes.
Yeah, I didn't. So, and then there was also the simple, like, I just couldn't think of a way to like. Initially, the original manuscript was like every character is going to have a redemptive aspect to it.
Yeah.
But again, the contrast I felt would be better if Walter was irredeemable, and I just couldn't fit that detail in there and make it work in an organic way that I thought was good.
Yeah.
So Walter is yeah, I have no plans to redeem him in the future. I think he's better off as an element that you need to have a black to contrast
Of
the white.
course. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the
Yeah,
right call.
he is perfectly hateable, even
Yeah.
compared to the other villain like Joker of the Checkered Hand, who is not one character, but that's part of his whole gimmick.
Yeah. Yeah, Joker represents a lot more, like, he's a very sinister force, an actual really malign element,
Yeah.
whereas Walter is supposed to capture more of the day-to-day
Yeah.
evil people.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
middle managers. Right.
Yeah, whereas Joker, he does come across him and his organization, the Checkered Hand, as this looming figure in the background with no good intentions. It's also opposed to the Democratic Union and the way things are, but you also don't want them to win.
Yeah.
It's very clear
From the
from
very
the
little
writing.
we get, yeah, we get a good feeling of them as a malevolent force in the background. I'm interested to see what you do with them in the future novels in this series.
I don't,
Yeah, I
I don't,
suppose, because I think in decaying systems you have competing power structures,
Yeah.
competing ideas, competing people that try to fill the vacuum. And so what I was bearing there was just a touch point of all these different alternatives to the Democratic Union being presented, and then various characters picking sides and struggling over those factions.
no, another minor character, let's say, but no, definitely not the least for his impact is, of course, Jane, the handler of Daniel
Yes.
Peterson.
Jane
How much
was
do you want to spoil about this character?
I'm fine with spoilers. I like spoilers. I usually can't resist. Um, and I have a feeling it's not going to cause too much damage if we spoil it.
Yeah, but he
It's
was
already
a
for free.
yeah, he's an interesting figure, definitely. The paternal figure of Daniel, and then it turns out he has his own less than savory side to him. He's involved in some shady stuff too. Yeah, but
Yeah, working as a
you
fixer for the mercenary community of City 57,
yeah,
which is totally not New York, you guys.
but you also get the sense that he is one of the sorry, what's the mercenary organization called again?
Uh,
The index.
Yes, the Index. You get the feeling that they are one of these players that's, poising themselves for the right moment to strike when the system finally collapses, like you were talking about with the competing power structures. And I think that's an interesting dynamic that you'll explore more in the future.
yeah, about the index, I do love its setup. How it literally takes the Soviet approach of using a pencil in space rather than designing a new pen in order to write, of literally going back to literally paper and written pencil documented
Files,
in
yeah.
actual indexed files in an underground vault to store information that can't be hacked.
Yeah, that was there's a lot of technological commentary I make on
Yeah.
that, and or I make in the book, and that was one of my more favorite examples where actually regressing in technology is in a way more advanced than
Then
than
digitizing
what
everything.
you would think. What would you think the logical progression
Yeah.
is? But I kind of wanted to indicate that just because something is defaulting to more traditional forms, just because of the decayedness of the situation, that does not necessarily mean that things are going backwards in the ways you expect.
Right.
Um,
It's
and
a
that
tactical
things are
decision,
merely
yeah.
adapting to circumstances. I kind of want to because a lot of literature presumes just a progression of technology,
Yeah.
Yeah, this
whereas
is
I think an
this
interesting idea is technology is just adaptation to circumstances.
Yeah, rather than viewing it as
yeah.
like a tech tree in a video game where it always gets more advanced.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm so sick of that philosophy in science fiction that where oh, I could rant for days about it, but I'm pretty sure you share my sympathies on that regard, Isaac, at least that it is it's a more or less a worship of scientism going forward in sci-fi for the past 100 years has basically kind of limited it.
E
It's the
e
Star Trek
it's been even
philosophy, and it's
longer than 100 years. It's the whole
Yeah, it goes back
technological
all the way to Jules
positivism thing.
Verne,
Yeah,
yeah.
H.G. Wells.
yeah.
Yeah.
But
No shade on H.G. Wells, of course, but still.
yeah, or Vern. But, yes. Now, was there we were looking to move on to, like, talking about your general writing process. Is there anything you would like to talk about the, book first before we move on? Or Gallo, was there anything else you had to ask?
Mostly, I wanted to ask questions regarding to your work ethic and your self promotion of your books, because I know you work tirelessly at that, even though you're very busy with your real life job, and it's actually quite admirable, honestly,
Yeah.
that you're basically relentless on that grind set, as the kids say.
I wish I was more relentless. I don't think I'm quite as relentless enough. Um, yeah, there was a brief period where I was working a job for a while, and I was writing alongside like 12-hour shifts.
Eesh.
And it was quite brutal trying to keep up because I was trying to keep a consistent release schedule for The Last Human,
Yeah.
and I was
Yeah.
also doing an audio season of 10 episodes with my voice actor Son of Sonnet during that time period. So it was a quite brutal time, but thankfully I'm currently vacationing at the moment,
That's
so
good.
I have a lot more time to dedicate to projects.
Best of luck with that. But, so anything
Yeah.
else you wanted to talk about with the story specifically?
No, I think we can move on to the
Okay,
next
yeah.
topic. I feel like we've
So,
touched all the major aspects.
yeah, so what's your general writing process? Because me and Gallo are writers as well, and when we talk with other people who are interested in it, it's always interesting seeing the actual process behind the end product.
Yeah, because we also have different approaches ourselves. Like
Yeah,
I'm very much stream of consciousness, and not in terms of like what the actual writing is, but in
yeah,
how
not
I
the actual
actually
prose.
write my stories. Yeah. Whereas a lot more authors recommended more structured, doing first drafts, writing like a script first before you actually write out a second draft kind of deal. What's your general take on that? What's your philosophy regarding writing as a whole?
So there's, I guess, there are two components of it. There's what I like to do, and then what I feel I have to do
Right.
is obligated by necessity. So what I definitely prefer the stream of consciousness. I generally do not like outlines.
Yeah.
I think basically all of my stories that I've ever written are essentially I have a beginning, I have an end in mind, and the rest I leave up to just empty space to get from that beginning to the end. So I'm always going from A to B to C, and so I always have like a north star that I'm following in the story. But in terms of the content, the majority of the content, a lot of it is just improvised as I go along.
Mm,
It has its drawbacks as well as its, I think, its strengths. And I think its main strength for me particularly is when I tried to do outlines really back in the day when I was just starting out. What would happen is I would get so bored with the story
yeah.
as I was outlining that I would just walk away from it.
Okay.
I the way that I like to keep myself entertained as I write. I think that's a struggle. That's the main struggle authors have is trying to entertain themselves because when you're writing a story, it's sort of like playing the same movie in your head over and over and
Yeah.
over
Definitely get
every
that
single
Yeah.
feeling.
day for months on end.
And some people just they can't have their creative juices or process flow that way without it getting stagnant.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they just burn out and then they never complete anything. Whereas for me, I like keeping it so uh, free form that it just that I take left turns quite a bit that I never saw coming, and that's how I kind of beat that just burnout and dredge.
So you're always like excited for the next turn of the page, even though you're literally the one writing the story.
Yeah, I wouldn't say my my vision extends always at least like 4 to 5 chapters out,
Right.
and then of course the ending as well.
Yeah.
But in terms of 20 to 30 chapters out, yeah, I I don't have any plans except for I guess what I also do is I bury ideas in the manuscript that I will know I will come back to
Yeah.
at a later date.
Oh, I can
Um,
appreciate that. Yeah, that's a useful trick. Especially one thing I particularly like that is that sometimes I find myself writing myself into a corner, and I get around it by just drawing attention to it, like it was out of place, and moving past it in the narrative. And then I find, usually, quite coincidentally, some point later in the story, we can literally just bring that back up as a plot point, and it's really interesting because it's like finding buried treasure you tripped over earlier.
yeah. Um, and I
Yeah.
sort of try to I make those seeds and I kind of make them indistinguishable from the world building. That's just like referenced offhand. But other times I build on them and I build on them and I build on them and I like to let that grow out organically. And and I'm aware that's a very similar description to a certain infamous author, how George R. Martin does things.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Oh yeah. But
which is why especially for the Last Human, which is a huge project that I just go ahead and spoil the ending at
Yeah.
chapter 27.
yeah.
So the reader doesn't have to be worried about how the story ends. They know how it ends.
Right.
at least in the broad strokes. And I kind of I try to be as liberal with the ending as I possibly can,
Yeah.
so that the reader is entertained by the journey and not necessarily by the destination itself.
Right. Yeah, that's a good approach to take with it. But hopefully, unlike Martin, you actually finish The Last Human.
I certainly have more faith in you finishing The Last Human than I have in Martin's finishing his
uh,
work.
Yeah.
well, even if I get, like, let's say, knocked off, for example,
Yeah.
there's flash forward sequences in The Last Human that are intended to serve as story breaks, where I'm hoping that, obviously there's a built-in investment that slowly grows over time, but I hope each one is like, let's say lightning strikes me and I die tomorrow.
Mhm.
It's at least halfway to something really satisfying, which is a lot better than just cutting off at a random point in the story.
Right.
Mm. All right. Well, another thing I thought, do you have any advice for other young creatives who maybe like seem overwhelmed or discouraged by all the difficulties in daily life and chasing their dreams? Would you have any advice for them in order to persist in the way you did?
Um, so I guess my main advice that I would give is to come up with your own strategies, because unfortunately writing is a very personal and particularized process.
Yeah.
No two people do it identically, so I can't really give you a tool set so much as just my own personal experience. But the main thing that has always held me back is burnout. That's been the number one thing which slowed productivity, which delayed a chapter a few days, or sometimes back in the past I'd go weeks without writing a single word. And the trick is to always be fighting against that burnout. I mentioned one strategy earlier. I think another strategy is to write at least 250 to 500 words a day, because I think you're like, I don't know how true this is for other authors, but I sometimes come across a snag where I hit a chapter where it's just not flowing out.
Definitely feel that. Yeah.
And
Yeah,
and if you leave it alone, sometimes it resolves, but the better thing to do, like, in every case I found, is to just force yourself through the scene, get through it, get a written version of it. And every single time I've done that, when I've put out a written version of that scene, and it still felt wrong, like, a little piece of food stuck in your teeth.
Yeah.
Um, when I had that written version in front of me, I immediately knew what I needed to adjust, like, snippets to take out, snippets to add in, a character motivation, a character moment, and it always worked itself out after that. Uh, because you have a real thing in front of you
Yeah.
instead of this hypothetical which you can't quite
Yeah.
visualize.
It's better to have a flawed actual written thing than a perfect not written thing hypothetically off in the future. Yeah.
that's just like holding you back from continuing the story and
Yeah.
the writing process.
Yeah. And if you put it off, it's just you're wasting time, and everyone always wants a complete book as soon as possible. Just because the suffering's over them.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Um, and the more you stretch it out, just the more painful it's gonna be.
yeah.
Yeah. Now,
Now,
go ahead,
go
Gala.
on.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna bring up your Kickstarter for the Vagabonds launch, Vagabonds Book One launch, Dead Man Running itself. There, uh, I believe it actually has succeeded well in the extent of its original intended goal. Is that
Yes, it
correct?
definitely did. If you, yeah.
Yeah, nearly 10 times the intended $186.
Well,
I
So
think I said it
that,
for 250.
yeah, but he has a different currency, I think, on
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
Substack.
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So, but yeah, it's not quite to 10, but yeah, it's definitely way more than the original one was at. So yes, congratulations on that. Gallo, was there something else you wanted to talk about with that particular point?
No, I just wanted to comment to bring it to a point where it's like if anyone listening here hasn't pledged to it there, uh it is worth looking into it there, especially for some of the rewards if you're interested in that, like getting an ebook straight to your account, or maybe even a signed paperback if you're particularly generous.
And if
Help
you're
a
not
man
sure
out.
you want to support, the whole thing's for free on Royal Road.
Yeah.
Just read it.
I would definitely recommend though that everyone here at least consider pledging some money to the Kickstarter just to, you know, if you can afford it, support the independent creators because, well, that's how we're going to build up this whole thing and create new art that actually gets out there and people enjoy compared to the rather stale dearth of entertainment we have nowadays in mainstream media.
Yeah, and you're definitely getting your money's worth with Dead Man's Running, even if
Yes,
it's free.
definitely.
Yeah, I do that because I see a lot of people. What they do is they really abuse their fans in Kickstarter campaigns where they deliver, like, they promise a product, they don't deliver a product. They promise a product, and then they never actually deliver it.
Yeah.
And then I've heard some really scummy things with refund policy
Uh
and just nightmares that have just destroyed audience trust.
yeah, there's been a
So
lot of
I always
those.
wanted to be as transparent as possible that yes, I do have this complete product in front of me. You can read it right now in its entirety and decide whether or not you actually want it or not.
All
So
right.
you can try before you buy, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Now, this early on, I don't think we'll have many, but if there's any questions, we can, for either us or Isaac, we can answer those. So if you want to
Yeah,
ask them, go ahead and ask them now.
super chats,
Super
yeah,
chats
super
we
chats are
don't
not
have
set
set
up,
up
so
yet. Yeah.
yeah, so we're just watching the chat in case you guys want to ask anything of Isaac.
Yeah.
I think so. That's something actually. Let me see.
There was a question earlier, but Isaac did answer.
Oh yeah, the Eamon Russ comparison character. Yeah, doesn't seem to. Someone brought up the difficulty of AI and as a threat to indie creators going forward, and yeah, that's a big one. But everyone's talking about that, so it's not really much point bringing it up in this conversation.
Yeah, it's kind of its own worms.
Yeah,
All right. We'll give it a few seconds, see if there, or a minute, see if there's any questions. Otherwise, we're probably gonna start wrapping it up.
yeah, because there's a delay between us speaking in here and what actually gets streamed, so we'll give
Yeah,
them a few bit.
yeah. But was there anything else you wanted to talk about in the with respect to anything, Isaac?
I suppose there is. It's an interesting topic that I've been thinking about because a lot of people are wondering, how do I get my stories out there?
Yeah,
How do I get eyes on my work? How do I get beta readers? And for my personal, because I write sci-fi and fantasy, that slides right into web forums like Royal Road. Now, there are significant downsides of web forums, namely that you have to write in the excess of like 500 pages before anyone notices you.
yeah,
Um,
Yeah, that's a real
it
thing.
yeah, it's really, you have to, in the modern internet sphere, and this is very sad to say because I didn't think it always used to be this way. I think the web 1.0, people like to call, was a lot kinder to text-based content than it is now.
yeah,
But nowadays, and I guess in some ways it's become easier nowadays, some ways harder. Like with AI, for example, right? You could come up with an AI generated cover,
right.
and that's good. The problem is everyone else is also using AI generated covers, so it's sort of, you look prettier, but everyone else also looks prettier. So it's kind of, you're back to where you're started. unless you forego AI entirely, whereas you invest like $500 into some cover art, in which case you better be getting really good cover art that
Yeah.
AI can't mimic, or
Yeah.
you don't use cover art at all, which really
which,
hurts
especially on
the
Royal
people.
Road, that is a very bad idea.
How you get eyes in your content is changing the algorithm. I think in a lot of ways in a bad way, but I think there's also, if you understand how to reach out to people, make your work more accessible, there's also opportunity there. At least I believe so. I'm just one guy trying to figure out how the internet works in terms of being an author, which
Yeah.
is no easy task.
And
Yeah.
hopefully this podcast can be a vehicle for helping young independent creators get eyes on their projects, because that's really what we want the main thing to be here, is to help create a network of artists and to help promote them. So, for now it's just this tiny little podcast, but you got to start somewhere, and hopefully we can have you on in the future when we have more of an audience and maybe discuss the Last Human and help you get more eyes on it there.
I would
That
love
way.
to discuss the last human with you.
Yes.
I've been very much enjoying it.
Thank you.
Yes, we'd definitely like to return the favor of you appearing on here so early in our career. So definitely would like to
Yeah.
return the favor. But yeah. So there is one last thing I'd like to touch on. And it's kind of related to what we were just talking about. But and forgive me if this ends up being a bit rambly or whatever, but we were talking about how in Dead Man Running there's this theme of trying to do the right thing and good in a world that hasn't actually taught you how to do that, and how that applies to the urban defenders in the book as well. But that reminded me of something you touched on in your most recent Substack article, the one about how to give advice to Gen Z for boomers, Xers, so on. And
Oh,
and one of the points you touched on in that is how usually older people are pretty quick to blame Gen Z shortcomings on personal flaws. And obviously, like you said, a lot of it is structural problems, even though, yeah, there are personal failings involved. But that got me thinking about something I've been noticing for a while, is that when I think about the shortcomings and mistakes I've personally made on my path to where I am, sure, I can say personal failings played at least a part in a lot of those, but at the same time, our society doesn't really give young people, or anyone for that matter, a good way of actually confronting and overcoming those personal failings. There's no structure to that. Like everything else, the advice is just pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And that's, the advice you always get from society is pretty much figure it out yourself. But, it's a bit ridiculous to expect that. And no one can figure out everything on their own. Humans are obviously, very social creatures, codependent. And that's why we have society in the first place. And The Last Human, like you're talking about, it kind of touches on this. As things are falling apart, people come together in these smaller groups to, you know, survive among that collapse. And that's also why, when you look at the most primitive societies in history, whatever time period or region of the world you look at, these primitive societies, everyone without exception is founded upon tribe and family, the two most fundamental units. And that's why, another part of why we're doing this podcast is to make any real lasting mark, you need some sort of community or network. And that's what we're trying to do with this podcast, create a space where the artists can, come promote their work to a wider audience and connect with other artists who they can collaborate and even learn from. And that's one thing I want people to take away from this is, you know, there's other people out there trying to help build a creative space. And sure, that may seem a bit overly ambitious, especially for like a tiny little podcast, but you got to start somewhere, right? Uh, yeah. And
yeah, I would say, all right. In regards to the essay you're referencing, it was titled Isaac's Rules for Talking to Nihilistic Zoomers.
yeah,
I mean, millennials and Gen Xers, at least the ones who are in the right headspace, they know that the solution to the times is to become worthy of the times, and
Yeah.
I agree with that. I
Yes.
think that's really the only way forward. A fair amount of them interpreted that essay as to be nihilistic, where I was trying to outline someone who's nihilistic, their thought process,
Okay.
and that the become worthy message is fundamentally a good message. I just think
Yes.
it's not being told in the
In the
correct
right
way,
way.
because you reach out to a broken person and you say become worthy. There are a number of ways that person is going to take that message, especially if the problems that they are facing are not the result of direct character flaws.
Yes.
Um, in which case, that person, if personal responsibility doesn't manifestly fix the issues in their life, either they're going to look at that advice and say, "Yeah, this isn't working," or two, they believe that they're fundamentally unworthy.
Yeah.
Um,
I think the perfect
Just leave
in
it.
example
which case,
you had in the article itself was those two posts from the same account. One was a good example of how to give advice, the other bad from the same person.
yeah, and people criticized me for saying he was right in the top post. But the reason I took that was because it's a very tepid example. I think he's right on the face of it. It's just the matter of a zoomer looks at that, and if he is already the nihilistic zoomer, the person is condemning him to be, he's not going to have a good reaction to that post at
Yeah.
all. You just radicalized him against you. I don't think, obviously you can't have perfect optics all the time. I don't expect that. The art is just suggesting frames for people to understand how nihilistic people think.
Yeah.
And um, I think the best way to really help with nihilistic people is not to really talk about the problems per se, but to focus on the good.
Yeah, it's
Because would a nihilistic person? Oh, sorry.
I was
You
gonna
continue.
say it's to sell them a vision, something they can actually concretely work towards and participate in, I'd say at
Yeah,
least.
it's also the way a nihilistic person thinks, the way a depressed person thinks.
Yeah.
Um, and I would also argue often a persecuted person thinks is they tend to view everything through a shade of gray,
Right.
whereas the good things in their life become immediately muted, whereas the bad things become like blacker than night. And
Hyper-emphasized, yeah.
the trick is not to focus so much on their problems, but trying to figure out how to switch the colors back on. In which case, encouragement,
Yeah.
um, compliments, just stuff that they can hold on to. There's this funny meme on the internet where you give a guy a compliment, or a girl gives a guy a compliment, he remembers it for the next 10 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
It's
I
true.
think
Yeah.
what
The same
I
spirit
think that's
applies to
what's
art.
more necessary,
Yeah.
because obviously if the become worthy advice on the face of it is was working, you wouldn't have so many people just lashing out against it.
Yeah, you need to
I
have
think it's
people who are willing to tell people who are trying to become worthy, "Hey, you're doing good so far, keep it up." Even if you're not
yeah,
necessarily
you
Yeah.
there
need
yet.
yeah. And yeah, I think the focusing on the problem is sort of it's right. And in many ways, it gets a lot right because obviously Zoomers have a lot of self-sabotaging behaviors.
Yeah.
But when you tell someone that they have self-sabotaging behaviors, there's a 50-50 chance they just despair further because they don't
Yeah.
know how to unroot just because you point it out doesn't mean they know how to necessarily fix
Yeah,
it,
like I
especially if it's
said
a habituated thought
yeah,
process.
like I said, they're told to fix it, but they're not given any real structure or even
or
instruction
even
on how to get out of it, how to fix those personal failings.
see, the thing is, what it is, become worthy is much better advice than pull yourself up by your bootstraps. It just sounds the same because no one has idea how to become worthy in a system where the system itself is
Tearing you
destroying you.
down, yeah,
Yeah.
but yeah,
Yeah, it's a difficult question.
yeah. So, yeah, for everyone out there, you know, getting through, the
Uh,
difficulties of our age or creating a artistic space. Yeah, these are Herculean labors, sure, but most of us don't really have much to lose, so we might as well try, right? That's my take on it at least. But unless
and
you
best
two
case
have
scenario,
yeah.
and best case scenario, if you win, you control the destiny of artistic interpretation for the next 100 years. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
you lose nothing, you could gain everything.
plenty to
Go
gain,
for it.
very little to lose, but yes, unless you two had anything to, add, I think that's where we'll end it.
No, I had nothing else. Isaac.
I think that's a good place to end on.
Okay, well, just
Uh,
so everyone knows, Isaac's link tree and his Kickstarter are in the description of the video. Please go check those out and offer him your support. And thank you, everyone, for listening. And thank you very much, Isaac, for coming on as a guest. Now, everyone, be sure to tune in next week where we'll be discussing the film It's a Wonderful Life while we search for our next guest. Good night, everyone.
Good night, and it was a pleasure to have you all.